This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rucham Abayim, welcome everyone. Parshas Beha'aloscha. We have really astounding material tonight. An amazing idea that emerges from the end of the Parsha. The end of the Parsha talks about the episode of Miriam and Aaron speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. To summarize, basically, they acknowledge Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness, but they said, who does Moshe Rabbeinu think he is? To separate from his wife. God speaks to us. God spoke to Abraham. God spoke to many Nevi'im. He never told them to separate from their spouse. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu think he's greater than any of the other Nevi'im? And what they didn't know was the greatness of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Rebbeinu Shem could come to him at any moment, and he had to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So Miriam contracts Saras, and Moshe Rabbeinu wants to daven for his sister. Vayitzak Moshe el Hashem leimar. Moshe calls out to God, saying, Moshe Rabbeinu does not daven along Shemona Esrei. Eis laharich ve'eis lekatzer. Sometimes you daven long, sometimes you daven short. This was one of the shortest tefillos in history. He said a very powerful tefillah, 5-word tefillah. Kael na refanala. He invokes the name Kael, which is very unusual. To daven with the name of Hashem Kael. When we daven, we never daven invoking the name Kael. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. We say Yud Kei Vav Kei. We say Elokim. Certainly Kael is one of God's names. But why is Moshe Rabbeinu specifically using the name Kael? And then even more difficult is the response of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because Miriam had Saras, so Rebbeinu Shalom says, you know how long Miriam needs to be locked up for? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, V'aviha yaroik yarak b'faneha. If her father would have spit in her face, if Miriam's father were to have spit in her face, she would have been ashamed for 7 days. She would not be able to go out in the public. She would be so embarrassed. Therefore, tisager shivas yamim, let her be locked up for 7 days, michutz lamachane, outside of the camp, v'achar te'asef, and then she could rejoin the camp. In other words, Rebbeinu Shalom is using an argument. If her father would have shamed her, if her father would have disgraced her, she would have had to be away ashamed for 7 days. So now that it's me, now that I'm the one who's upset with her, certainly she needs to be away for 7 days. Rashi points out that this argument is what we call a kal v'chomer, or in Latin, a fortiori argument, or more correctly, an a fortiori argument. Kal v'chomer in Latin is a fortiori, named after. Now, in Latin, or even in English, whenever you see the word fort means strong, like fortitude, or a fort. So, a fortiori means a fortiori, a strong argument, based on if something applies in a weak case, all the more so it should apply in a stronger case, right? We all know what a kal v'chomer is. If a little kid over there could hit the baseball 100 feet, then all the more so some guy who's 6'5", working out in the gym, taking steroids for the last 10 years, certainly he could hit it 100 feet, right? So you'll say, more than that. Not only could he hit 100 feet, he could probably hit it out of the park. No, we have no right to say that. That's called Dayoi Lava Minadin Lios Kenidain. You can't learn more to the Nilmad. You can't extend what the teacher teaches you to more than the teacher has himself. You can't extend it more than you see by the model. And therefore Rashi says, look at Rashi number 2. If her father would have showed her an angry face, she would have been ashamed for 7 days. All the more so if God is upset with her, she should be locked up for 14 days. So why doesn't Miriam go away for 14 days? Ella dayoi levamin hadin liyos kenidain. It's enough for something that comes from a kal v'chomer, a din is a kal v'chomer, to be like the case in point. In other words, you can't learn more than what the teacher has. So if you're learning out, if the small guy could hit it 100 feet, all you have a right to say is the big guy could hit it 100 feet. So you say, what do you mean? He could probably hit it much further. No, you have no right to extend it any further. And therefore Rashi says, Dayoi levamin adin liyos kenidain lefikach af benezifasai tisager shivas yamin. This is how Rashi learns this episode in Chumash, where God is telling Moshe Rabbeinu kal v'chaymer. Now Rabbi Say, anybody who has any experience learning Gemara knows kal v'chaymer is one of the main hermeneutical principles, one of the 13 principles of exegesis. Whenever you're learning Gemara, Rabbi Shem gave Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai 13 principles by which to darshan the Torah, and we say it every morning. Kal v'chaymer, Gzeira Shava, Binyanav, Klal Uprat. There are 13 midos shatar nidreshes mehem. Kal v'chaymer is one, especially in the Gemara Masechta Kedushin. The Shas is Molei v'Gadush with the concept of Kal v'chaymer. Why in this instance is God addressing Moshe Rabbeinu with Kal v'chaymer? If Hashem wants to paskin what Miriam's halacha should be, Hashem should say Miriam should be locked up for 7 days. Why is Rabbi Shem making a whole sugya out of it? If her father would have spit in her face, she'd be locked up 7 days. And now that it's on me, really, it should be 14 days. But so therefore it goes back to 7 days. What's the Gemara? Why is Rabbi Shem giving a pilpul share to Moshe Rabbeinu? Just say, Tisager Shivas Yamim. What's the union of using a Kal v'chaymer over here? And as we're going to see, by the way, the Stipler wrote a sefer on Chumash called Birchas Peretz, and in the back of the Birchas Peretz, the Stipler wrote different gematrias. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky once asked the Stipler if he should also, come up with gematrias. So the Stipler says, you should know. No, you shouldn't. Because I don't work on them. They just fall into my head during Kriyas HaTorah. So let me tell you, I'm going to share with you one gematria of the Stipler. Says the Stipler on this pasuk, Tisager Shivas Yomim, the gematria of Shivas Yomim is Dayoy Leva Min Hadin Liyois Kedine Hanidain. By the way, the Stipler in dozens of places learns that the words of Rashi's comment is gematria, the word of the pasuk. Many, many times. So as a Stipler, Shivas Yomim is gematria, this principle, Dayoy Leva Min Hadin Liyois Kedine Hanidain. Now, we all know every morning before Pesukei de Zimra, whether you say it or you don't say it, right before Mizmar Shir Chanukah Sabayis, or if you daven Nusach Sard, Haidu, you have Brisa Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, Oimer, B'shalosh Esrei Midos Hatar Nidreshes Behem. And you ever wonder, this is probably the most unrelated thing you possibly could be saying before you start davening. You're not about to learn Reb Chaim al Rambam. You're not about to learn Reb Shimon Shkop. You're about to daven and praise God. Why are you saying the 13 principles by which the Torah is expounded on? Now, you should know, davening is not for learning. Davening time is not for learning. People come to davening with all kinds of Gemaras and Shas, Bavli, Yishalmi. You're not allowed to learn during davening. Mishnah Berurah says, during Chazar Sashatz, you're not allowed to learn. If somebody's Maver Sedra during Chazar Sashatz, could be you don't even get credit for it. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says maybe you have to do it again.
Maybe he does it before Chazar.
Whatever it is, Zman Torah L'chad, Zman Tefillah L'chad. So why are you saying Shalosh Esrei Midos Shatar Nidreshes Bahem before Tefillah? I could understand before you go to the Shir Klali. So before the Shir, everyone should say Rabbi Shmuel Oimer B'Shalosh Esrei Midos Shatar Nidreshes Bahem. But why before davening? And what are the 13 principles? You have number 1, Kal v'chaymer, leading off. Number 1 is Kal v'chaymer. Number 2 is Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava is when you have 2 words in 2 different places. Let's say in one place it says Bechesed ve'emes yichlu bar avain, and one pasuk it says Poiked avoin avoi salbonim. So the Gemara says when there's a petiro and someone passes away, it brings kapara. It says here avain, it says there avain. And then there's something called binyan av. Binyan av is what it says in one place you could bring to another place. Then you have klal uprat. And then finally, batting last is who? V'chein shnei ksuvim hamakchishim zeh. Zeh, 2 psukim that contradict each other. Ad sheyavay hakadosh v'chiyavanehem. And if you ever wondered, why in the world does it say the word v'chein? What do you mean v'chein? by all the other Kal V'chomer, Gzeira Shava, Binyanav. Doesn't say Kal V'chomer, V'chein Gzeira Shava, V'chein Binyanav. Why the last one is it V'chein? V'chein also makes no sense. V'chein, and similarly, Shnei Ksum Achirim Zeh Zeh is not similar to any of the above mentioned methodologies. By the way, where is this Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel? Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel, is the introduction to the Sifra. What's the Sifra? Sifra is Torah Sheba'al Peh on Sefer Vayikra. It's also called Torah's Kohanim. So the introduction to Sifra or Torah's Kohanim is Brisa, the Rabbi Shmuel. And the Sifra begins, what's the Kal V'chomer? Oh, says the Sifra, let me tell you the quintessential Kal V'chomer. Says the Sifra, Kal V'chomer Ketzad. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, if her father would spit in her face, she'd be locked up 7 days. So Kal V'chomer to the Shechina, 14 days. But why not 14 days? Dayoy leva min adin liyois kenidain. So here you have it. The Sifra is saying the quintessential Kal V'chomer is the Kal V'chomer that the Rebbeinu Shem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that if her father would have spit in her face, she should be locked up 7 days. All the more so, now that I'm upset with Miriam, she should be locked up for 7 days. Why is this the quintessential Kal V'chomer in Kol HaTorah Kula? And why is Rebbeinu Shem invoking it at this juncture? Okay. If I were to ask you, what was the first Kal V'chomer in history? What's the first Kal V'chomer in history? What? Kayin. Heva. What's the first Kal V'chomer in history? The first Kal V'chomer in history was not said by a big Lamdin, not by a big Talmud Chacham, not even by an Adam, not even by the sun or the moon. The first Kal V'chomer in history was said by the grass. The grass. You ready for this? Says the Gemara in Chula in Daf Samach. Look at number 5. Darash Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. We say every morning, Yehi Chivoid Hashem Lioilam Yismach Hashem b'masav. Let the honor of God be forever. By the way, in the Siddur of the Arizal, listen carefully. The Arizal writes, what's the gematria of Yehi Chivoid? Yehi is 25. Chavoid is 32. What's 25 and 32? 57. Says the Arizal, the gematria of Yehi Chavoid, Yud Kei Vav Kei Kale. Yud Kei Vav Kei is 26. Kale is 31. 57. Yehi Chavoid are the two names of God. Yud Kei Vav Kei Kale. And the question is, very nice, but who cares? Why is it important that Yehi Chavoid is begematria Yud Kei Vav Kei Kale? But that's what the Arizal says. And the Gemara in Chulin wants to know, who said the words, Yehi Chavoid Hashem Lioilam, Yismach Hashem b'masav? Says the Gemara, this pasuk was said by the Sar HaOilam, by the angel of the world, by the minister of the world. Why? Because Hashem commanded the trees, you should grow leminehu. Every tree, an orange tree should produce orange, an apple tree should produce apples, a pear tree should produce pears, and it should not be produced bi'erbuvia, in confusion and mix up. Every tree should be loyal to its indigenous species, not mix up with other species. So the grass hears this. God never told the grass to produce leminehu. God never told the bushes to produce leminehu. God never told the herbs to produce leminehu. He only told the trees. So the grass, the Deshaya made a Kal V'chomer, that if God wants the trees to grow according to their species, certainly we should grow according to our species. And then the Gemara says the Deshaya made another Kal V'chomer, that if trees grow by themselves. An apple tree, it acquires its territory, it starts to grow, and no apple tree comes within the Dalet Amos of another apple tree. Every tree has its own territory. So anyway, it's not even the derech of a tree to be mixed up with other species. And yet God had to tell trees to be lemineu. Kal V'chomer, us grass and bushes and herbs that we tend to mix up, certainly we have to grow lemineu. And when the officer of the world saw that the grass made this Kal V'chomer, you know what the officer of the world said? Yehi Chavoid Hashem Lioilam, let the honor of God be forever. Yismach Hashem b'masav. So this Gemara is revealing to us an amazing thing, that who Who made the first Kal V'chomer in history? The grass. Not your 7th grade Rebbe. The first Kal V'chomer in history was made by the grass. Why is this the first Kal V'chomer in history? And why was the Sar HaOlam so ecstatic that, oh, look what great creations you have. They even make Kal V'chomers. Why is Yehi Chavoid Hashem Li'olam seen and manifest by the Kal V'chomer of the grass? And what is the secret of the Arizal? That the gematria of Yehi Chavoid are the 2 names of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Kel. Another interesting thing. We know Yosef framed the brothers. He put the goblet in their knapsack. And the brothers come to Yosef and they say, Yosef, you think we would steal your goblet? Even money that we found in our knapsacks, we return to you. Even money we didn't take, we return to you. Certainly we would never go and steal your goblet, right? The pasuk says, look at number 6, Hein kesef asher matzanu b'fiam techoseinu. The money that we found in our knapsack, heshivoinu elecha me'azkan. We return to you. Ve'ech nignov mi beis adoinecha kezvaizov. How could we steal from you silver or gold? Says Rashi. This is one of the 10 Kal V'chomers in the Torah. Huh? So let me understand that for a minute. You're telling me that Yosef is confronting the brothers, convicting them of a capital offense of stealing his goblet, and what do the brothers say? Wait a second. Yosef, take out the Gemara Kedushin. Don't you know the sugi of Kal V'chomer? Madach, the money that we found in our knapsack, we return to you. Kal V'chomer, we would never steal your goblet. Now it's a kopel shir. Now Yosef's going to kill them. Right? Man, if a Rebbe goes a minute overtime, you know what people, and to give an unsolicited shir in the palace of Mitzrayim, what are the brothers doing making Kal V'chomers to Yosef? What are they up to? Kal V'chomer. I'll tell you another interesting thing. Hashem tells to Moshe, take them out of Mitzrayim. Moshe says, I'm going to take them out of Mitzrayim. Hey, Bnei Yisrael, Shamu Elai. The Bnei Yisrael don't listen to me. Ve'ech Yishmaeni Paroi. Now Moshe Ben is giving Rebbeinu Shalom a shir, a Kal V'chomer shir. I mean, it seems like at the most unopportune times, all of a sudden we're drumming up the Kal V'chomer. Who's the greatest Baal Chesed of all time? The paragon of Chesed. No? Abraham Avinu. Chesed. Right? Chesed li Abraham. Chesed li Abraham. They even made an organization, Chesed li Abraham. Right? Where did Abraham get his midah of Chesed from? Says the Medrash, he learned it from Shem ben Noach. When Shem comes out, it's a Medrash, Shochar Tov, Parsha Lamed Zayin, look at number 9. When Shem ben Noach comes out of the Teva, Abraham says, what's the chus that you have to go out of the Teva? Shem said, in the chus of my chesed. Abraham said, what kind of chesed? There are no aniyim in the Teva. You gave out tzedakah in the Teva, Tomchei Shabbos, Bikar Cholim. What kind of chesed in the Teva? So Shem says, look, there are all kinds of animals, and I had to feed the animals, and if we ever came late, they really gave it to us. We did chesed in the Teva, and that's in that merit we left the Teva. Says Avraham Avinu, if doing chesed to animals is necessary to get out of the Teva, Kal V'chomer, all the more so, how important it is to do chesed to Bnei Adam. So here you have the greatest Baal Chesed in history, the paragon of chesed, the semel of chesed, and he doesn't do chesed on his own. He has to make a Kal V'chomer from Shem ben Noach. He only knows Midas HaChesed because he makes an Fortiori argument. Avraham Avinu only does chesed because he makes a Kal V'chomer from Shem. And then there's a Gemara in Kedushin. There's a story, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Tzadok, Hayu Mesubin, beware. Don't say B'nai Brak. Hayu Mesubin, beveis hamishta. They're at a party. And they're at the party of the son of Ram Gamliel. And Ram Gamliel was serving them. So, what happened? Rabbi Lezer gladly took it. Rabbi Yeshua didn't want to be makabel from Ram Gamliel because you can't allow a rabbi to serve you. So Rabbi Lezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, what's the problem? Rabbi Lezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, you're going to let Ram Gamliel serve you? So Rabbi Yeshua says, of course I am. If even Avraham Avinu, the greatest of all men, served Bnei Adam, like the pasuk says, "V'hu oimed aleihem," then we can't let Ram Gamliel serve us. I mean, if Avraham Avinu could serve Archim, then let Ram Gamliel serve us. So here we have it, the flip side. Why is Rabbi Yeshua accepting chesed from Ram Gamliel? Kal v'chomer, that if Avraham Avinu did chesed to Archim, certainly Ram Gamliel could do chesed to us. So it comes out like circular almost. Where does Avraham Avinu get midas ha-chesed from? He makes the kal v'chomer from shame. And where does Ram Gamliel get chesed from? He makes the kal v'chomer from Avraham Avinu. So Rabbi say this is a very mysterious sugya. The mysterious appearances of kal v'chomer in Kol HaTorah Kula. Why do this concept of kal v'chomer, they make these mysterious appearances? Why is it? How do we explain this? Well, the Marsha in Masechta Nedarim gives us a little bit of a clue. It says the Marsha that numbers are very significant, and in our Toraseno Akdosha we find the number 13 associated with many holy things. It says the Marsha, B'chama dvarim kadoshim matzinu misbar hazeh. We find many holy things with the number 13. Number 1, Yud Gimel Midoisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the 13 attributes of God. What are the 13 attributes of God? Hashem Hashem, Kel Rachel Mechanun, Erech HaPayim, Rav Chesed Yemes. And Yud Gimel Midois Shahatorah Nidrashes Bahem, the 13 hermeneutical principles, 13 principles with which the Torah is expounded. And the Rambam also says Yud Gimel Ikrim. Marsha is not necessarily saying that these different ideas that are all number 13 are related to each other in any way. The Marsha is just merely making note that there are many things in our Torah that are the number 13. Comes along the Malbim in the Sefer Eretz Chemda, and the Malbim says something which is Oyoim V'Noira, unbelievable. Says the Malbim, why is Moshe Rabbeinu davening with the midah of Kale? Kale na rifanala. Why is he davening with the midah of Kale? Says the Malbim that we have 13 midas of the Ribono Shel Olam that will never be returned empty-handed. Shaloi tashuv reikam. What are they? Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech HaPayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Emes. Noitzach, these are the most powerful tefillah we have. Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, Melamed Shenesatev HaKadosh Baruch Hu K'Shliach Tzibur, V'Amar L'Moshe Yisrael Oimrim Zeh Lo Yashuvu Reikam. Says the Malbim. How do you invoke? How do you bring out Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim? So Ribono Shel Olam gave us Yud Gimel Midos Shahatorah Nidrashes Bahem. And each time you learn one of the Yud Gimel Midos Shahatorah Nidrashes Bahem, it brings out one of the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. So people say, they go to a shiur, and the shiur is about this whole complicated thing, and they say, come on, why don't you talk about something relevant? No. You think that when you talk about something relevant, it changes your life? It's because you don't know how the way the Torah operates. The way the Torah operates is, when you learn a complicated sugya and kedusha about kal v'chomer, that is ma'orer, one of the midos harachamim. When you learn about gzeira shava, it's ma'orer, one of the yud gimel midos harachamim. When you learn klal pradu klal, it's ma'orer, one of the yud gimel midos harachamim. So says the Malbim, now we have to know which midah of Shahatorah Nidrashes Bahem lines up with which one of the 13 Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Well, the Mekubalim teach us, Va'arizal B'Roisham, that when the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, Hashem are not part of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. They are the source of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Hashem, even though the Rishonim say Hashem is Midah 1 and 2, the Mekubalim say no. That is the shoyresh, that is the makar of Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. The first of Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim is Kale. And what midah she'Torah nidreshes behem corresponds to kale? Kal v'chomer. So Moshe Rabbeinu, this is the way the Malbim says it, but we may have to say it a little differently. Moshe Rabbeinu hears from the Rebbeinu Shel Olam a kal v'chomer v'avia yarak yarak b'faneh loisikam shavas yamim, that if her father would spin her face, she would have to be locked up 7 days. Kal v'chomer to the Shechina. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, oh, kal v'chomer, now I could be mispalel to the midas harachamim kale na rifana la. Says the Malbim that if you learn kal v'chomer, you're ma'ira midas rachamim. People think, I learned Gemara. What am I getting out of learning Gemara? If you want to get rachamei shamayim, it's all in Talmud Bavli. You'd give midoy she'Torah nidreshes behem. You want to be ma'ira kale, kal v'chomer. Says the Malbim, now we understand the pasuk in Yeshaya. Ready for this? V'atoimer tzion azavani Hashem v'Hashem shcheichani. And Mekubalim say, right, as real. V'atoimer tzion azavani Hashem v'Hashem shcheichani. 2 Hashems. These 2 Hashem are the 2 Hashems, Mekubalim say, of Hashem ke'orachim mechana. So what Klal Yisrael are saying, our Rebbeinu Shalom, we have nothing anymore. Even the Yudgimel Midos Harachamim have forsaken us. V'atoimer tzion azavani Hashem v'Hashem shcheichani. We don't even have Yudgimel Midos Harachamim. So Hashem says, what are you talking about? You do have Yudgimel Midos Harachamim. You know why? Hasishkach isha ula meirachem ben v'na. Hashem says, Kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer. If a mother can't forget her child, if a mother cannot forget her womb, then I certainly cannot forget you. What's God saying? You still have your Gimel Midas Harachamim. The proof is, I'm making a Kal v'chomer. And if I can make a kal v'chomer, that means you have the first midah, you have midas kale. And if you have the first midah, that's symbolic, you have all your gimel midas harachamim. Says the Malbim, that is why Moshe Rabbeinu's mispalel, kale no refan Allah, because when you hear kal v'chomer from the Rebbeinu Shel Olam, that teaches that you can now access midas kale. Says the Avodas Yisrael, Machon Maggid, taking the same idea of the Malbim, he says the exact same words, that since Moshe Rabbeinu heard a kal v'chomer from God, therefore he could be mispalel for kale. So here the brothers are in Mitzrayim, and they're suffering, they're in a terrible matzav. They're in a terrible situation. They're being accused by the most powerful man in the world of stealing his goblet. What are they going to do? How are they going to access Rachamei Shamayim? They're stuck. Their back is up against the wall. The only thing they could do is they say to Yosef, Hein Kesef Hamusha Asher Matzanu V'Yad Rezenu Heshivanu Elechem Eretz Kenan V'Ech Nignav Mibeis Adoinecha Kesef Oizav. The only thing that the brothers could do when their back is up against the wall, more powerful maybe than Sefer Tehillim, more powerful than anything, is Kal v'chomer. Your Gimel Midas she'Torah nidreshes behem. Because if you learn Kal v'chomer, it's ma'orer midas kale. And therefore I would like to suggest, when Klal Yisrael is being tormented in Mitzrayim, being tortured in Mitzrayim, they're ba'avodas perach, Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Rebbeinu Shel Olam. V'hineinam b'nei Yisrael lo shamu elai ve'ech yishmaini paroi. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kal v'chomer, kale. That's how Moshe Rabbeinu is accessing the Rachamei Shamayim. In another shiur we took it a few steps further, but for now, for this shiur we're leaving it that episode as is for now. So this is an unbelievable thing that the Malbim is Megala to us, that the Avodas Yisrael, the Machon Maggid is Megala to us, that your Gimel Midos Harachamim are nisoyer, are awakened through learning your Gimel Midos she'Torah nidreshes behem. Comes the Arvei Nachal. Now, who's the Arvei Nachal? If you open up your Shulchan Aruchs, we know one of the primary commentaries on Orach Chaim is the Magen Avram. There's a super commentary on the Magen Avram called Levushei Surad. Levushei Surad was written by Rav David Eibeshitz. No relation to Rabbi Yonasan. He also wrote a sefer on Chumash called Arvei Nachal. And he says an amazing thing. Look at number 17. Yesh le'el yadi lasois imachem ra. Lavan says to Yaakov, Yesh le'el yadi. Does anybody know what the word El means in this pasuk? It doesn't mean God's name. Number 17. It means Al Elei Haaretz. I have the power to do bad to you, Yaakov. But what could I do? But the God of your father, MMH, yesterday, Amar Elai Leimar, said to me, saying, Hishamer lecha, be careful, midaberim Yaakov, from speaking to Yaakov, mitoiv ad ra, good or bad. So Lavan is saying, Yesh le'el yadi, I have the El power, but I'm not going to hurt you because God told me not to say anything bad to you. So as the Sefer Arvei Nachal, Rav David Eibeshitz, why would Lavan say, I have the power to harm you? If God told him he can't harm him, then he doesn't have the power to harm him. What's he saying? Yesh le'el yadi. Furthermore, why does he use the word El? Now, in Nevi'im and Ksuvim, you find a couple of times El means power, not God. But nowhere in Chumash, except for this instance, does somebody say the word El referring to power. Yesh le'el yadi, I have power. Why would he use that word El? Says Arvei Nachal, I heard in the name of Rav Doiv Ber Mimezrich, the Mezrich Maggid, who probably that is where the Malbim got it from also, because as we're going to see, this all comes from Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev. All of these ideas we're saying, whether in the Arvei Nachal, which is a Sefer Chasidus, or in the Malbim, they both trace it back to Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev. Now the Malbim doesn't say he got it from there, but it's well known the Malbim learned Kabbalah from Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev. Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev was called the Sar Beis Hazoyhar. You know, a play on words. Sar Beis Hazoyhar, Sar Beis Hazoyhar. Bnei Yissaschar writes, he never saw or heard of anyone in his generation who had complete mastery over Kabbalah more than Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev. Rav Tzvi Hersh once said, very interesting, you know, people give money to Rabbi Meir Balanes. Many people have Rabbi Meir Balanes Pushka. That was classically reserved. If Loyaleno, there's a choila, a goistes, people give a lot of money to Rabbi Meir Balanes. So Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev explained, what's the inyan of tzedakah to Rabbi Meir Balanes? Because the Gemara says, Roiv goisesim lamisa. Most people who reach the stage of goises, like someone who's in a coma, they don't make it through. Yeah, there's a miyat that makes it through, but Roiv goises lamiyah. But Rabbi Meir Shita was, he's chayshesh for the miyat. Rabbi Meir is chayshinan lemiyuta. So when there's a goises, people give money to the tzedakah Rabbi Meir Balanes in order to be mechazik the shita of Rabbi Meir that were chayshesh for the miyat who make it through. That's Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachev. Okay. But, says the Arvei Nachal, again what we're learning is, Yud Gimel Midos, Sha'atayra Nidreshes Bahem, correspond to Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. And that's why when Moshe Rabbeinu hears Rebbeinu Shalom Mekal V'chomer, he's Mispalel, Kael, Na, Refanallah. Says the Arvei Nachal, we know God has different names. God has name Elohim. God has a name Kael. Why does God need so many names? What's the purpose of all these names? Each name of God is a different way that we relate to Him. So for instance, Elohim means Takif, Ubal HaYecholas, Ubal HaKoychos Kulam. That means, if God tells you to do something, you listen. You don't like it? He's Melech Malchei HaMelachim. He makes a decree, you follow it. Something happens, you're makabel it. That's God as Elohim. But you'll say, okay, whatever God tells me, I do. But to start figuring things out, well, if God says don't do this, so I certainly shouldn't do B. If God said don't do A, now I'm going to start figuring out not to do B. Do I have to do that? Am I subject to God's authority in a way, even where He didn't tell me explicitly, and now I have to figure out and make a kal v'chomer? Yeah. Because God is not only Elohim, He's also Kael. And God acting as Kael teaches us that not only do we have to listen to him when he tells us something explicitly, but even if we're able to figure out what his Ratzain is, we also have to follow that. That is the midah of Kel, like we learned. Kel corresponds to what? Kal v'chomer. Why is the first Kal v'chomer in history made by the grass, the Deshan? Very, very simple. You know why? Because God never told the grass to grow leminayim. God only told the trees. What do you do with grass? What's the purpose of the Deshan? Oichel. It's food. Oichel is food. Grass is to eat for the animals, and at that time for man also. Man wasn't allowed to eat meat yet. The Deshan was the mainstay, the food of mankind. What midah of the Ribbono Shel Olam is mefarnes us? We say in Berachas Hamazon, Kihu Kel Zan u'mefarnes akal. It's the midah of Kel. Kel is mefarnes us. So where does grass come from? Which midah of God? Kel. It is completely a representation of God's midah of Kel. That's why they're the ones to make the first Kal v'chomer and Kol HaTorah Kula. Because since grass, the Shiurim, is Oichel. By the way, what's the gematria of Oichel? Aleph, Vav, Chaf, Lamed. 57. Also the gematria of Zan. Also the gematria of Yud Kei Vav Kei, Kale. Yud Kei Vav Kei is 26. Kale is 31, that's 57. Grass comes from Yud Kei Vav Kei, Kale. That's the midah of Zan. Zan is 57. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Kale, 57. Oichel, 57. Since it comes from Kale, Yud Kei Vav Kei, there's only one day of creation. It says Kitoiv 2 times. Which day? Third day of the week. Why? Kale, Yud Kei Vav Kei, both Shemos of Hashem. So therefore, since food is emanating from the midah of Kale, and Kale is brought out into the world through Kal v'chomer, that is why the first Kal v'chomer in history was made by the grass, made by the Deshaim. So the Sar HaOlam says this is unbelievable. Because never have we seen God being honored until the grass honored God. Why is that? Because until that day, Hashem told the Yehiyar, Vayehiyar, Yehi Rakiah, Yehi Rakiah. Everyone was just doing what God said. All you saw was, Vayomer Elokim, Vayomer Elokim, Vayomer Elokim. But nobody ever honored God. Everybody only feared God. Fear God means you do what He tells you. But how do you show honor? You show honor to somebody. The fact that you listen to somebody doesn't mean you honor them, just means you're afraid of what they're going to do if you don't listen to them. Honor is when you figure out what the person would want. So when the Sar HaOlam sees the grass and says, wow, this grass is not just listening to Hashem by growing, but it's honoring God by making a Kal v'chomer, that if the tree should grow leminayim, certainly we should grow leminayim. What does the Sar HaOlam say? Yehi chevod Hashem li'olam. We see kavod of Hashem. That's why the Arizal says, what's the numerical value of Yehi chevod? Yud Kei Vav Kei Kale. Because Yehi chevod is the praise that the Sar HaOlam gave to God when the midah of Yud Kei Vav Kei Kale was brought out into the world by the Kal v'chomer of the grass. That is why, of all the names of Hashem, we never say Elokim Kavod, we never say Tzavakos Kavod, we never say Yud Kei Vav Kei Kavod, but it's Kale HaKavod. Why is it Kale HaKavod? Because through the midah of Kale, which allows us to darshan Kal v'chomer, that is what brings Kavod to the Ribbono Shel Olam. So says the Arvei Nachal. But says the Arvei Nachal an amazing thing. Everything good in this world has its counterpart, L'tzad Hara. So you have Elokim. Elokim says, do what God says. But some people have Elohim Acherim. What does Elohim Acherim say? I don't do what God says. I follow my desires. You follow Elokim, I follow Elohim Acherim. It's Zelu Mazeh Asa Elokim. What does the midah of Kale say? The midah of Kale says, I listen to God even with things that He didn't tell me explicitly because I darshan a kavachomer. What if somebody doesn't follow that? What if somebody follows el acher? Then what doesn't he do? He'll listen to God when God tells him something explicitly, but he won't listen to God if God tells him A, and he won't try to figure out, well, if God told me A, then I certainly can't do B. That's somebody who follows el acher. Lavan says to Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov, all God told me is, Hishamer lecha medaber em Yaakov mitoy vad ra. All God told me is, don't say a bad word to Yaakov. I won't say a bad word to you, I'll just kill you. But Kal v'chaymer, you can't kill Yaakov. No, Lavan says, Yesh le'el yadi, I have a different el. You have an el that darshans Kal v'chaymer l'toiv. I have el acher. My el acher doesn't darshan Kal v'chaymer. Yesh le'el yadi, I could harm you. Because all God told me is, Al tedaber im Yaakov mitoy vad ra. Don't speak to Yaakov, good or bad. I'm not going to say one bad word to you, Yaakov. As I shoot you, I'm not going to say a word. What midah does Lavan have? Yes, he has el acher. He doesn't have the midah of el latoiv, of kel latoiv. He doesn't have midas kal v'chomer, of yehi chavoid Hashem li'olam, of yud kei vav kei kel, of the kal v'chomer of the deshaim. He makes no kal v'chomers. He listens to God when God tells him explicitly, but yesh la'el yadi lasis imachem ra. This is the midah of latoiv kel and lara. Latoiv is the deshaim, lara is lavan. By the way, the Bnei Yissaschar in 4 places quotes this idea of the Malbim. That when Moshe Rabbeinu heard a kal v'chomer from God, v'avia yaroik yarak b'faneh alois yikolem, so Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel to midas kel. So says Bnei Yissaschar, let's take it a few steps further. If kel corresponds to kal v'chomer, what's the next midah of rachamim? Racham. What does racham say? Racham corresponds to Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava. That's why the Gemara says in Masechta. That's why the Gemara says in Brachos and Afhei that anyone who is oisek b'Torah and does gemilas chasadim, and the Gemara says a frightening thing, v'koiver es banav, buries his children. The Gemara says moichlin lo yavonosav. And the Gemara says, I understand Torah, we learn that out from a pasuk. The chesed, and we understand chesed, we learn it out from a pasuk. The chesed ve'emes yichu bar avain. But koiver es banav. Why? Someone who's koiver es banav, Hashem is moichel their averos. So Gemara says, yeah, we make a gzeira shava. What's the gzeira shava? It says, chesed ve'emes yichaper avain, and it says, number 19, and it says, Mashalem avoin avois. So just like avois lebanim, when there's a punishment of avois lebanim, it says avoin, it also says kapara avoin, so we make a gzeira shava. Why are we making a gzeira shava? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to be ma'ira the midah of racham, of a hu racham yichaper avoin. And therefore, if you want to be ma'ira racham, kavachomer is ma'ira kel. What's ma'ira racham? Gzeira shava. And the Bnei Yissaschar says an unbelievable line. He writes, in number 19, about 12 lines down, says this in Ma'amorei Chodesh Elul, Maimer Beis. V'hinei zeh darkeinu kol hayoim. This is our path every day. Ki loi b'mikra hu b'toraseinu. It is not coincidental. Asher ha'alocha achas nilmedes b'kal v'chomer. You know, sometimes you learn a Gemara and the Gemara learns something out with a kal v'chomer, and one Gemara learns something out with gzeira shava, and one Gemara learns it out with klal prado klal, and one Gemara learns it out with binyanav. And you say, well, does it really matter which of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Rashi? Yes, every limud is specifically linked to a unique methodology, because that methodology somehow is connected to the type of limud we're trying to make. Certain limudim require gzeira shava because we need rachamim. Some limudim need kal v'charim because we need kel. Some limudim need chanun, binyanav. Ask the Bnei Yissaschar, it's Hashem, kel, rachum, v'chanun, right? What comes first? Rachum or chanun? First rachum and then chanun. So why, in the pasuk, is it v'chanoisi es asher achayin, v'richamti es asher rachem? Why is it first chanun and then rachum? It should say v'richamti asher rachem, v'chanoisi es asher achayin. If after all, Hashem, kel, rachum, v'chanun. Well, he says an amazing thing. Gezer Shava corresponds to Rachum, right? Kel is Kal V'chomer. Rachum, Gezer Shava. Chanun, Binyanav. Listen carefully, it's unbelievable. Why is Chanun correspond to Binyanav? Because what's the midah of a father? When Esav comes to Yaakov, he says, who are these kids? Hayeladim asher chanan Elokim. Yeladim, a father to children is midas chanina, chanun. A father's relationship to a child is chanun. Why does a father love his children? Because they find chen in his eyes. You can have a little baby, he's babbling, nobody understands a word he's saying, but to the parent, the child finds chen in the eyes of the parent. And therefore, even though the child is not making any sense, to the parent it makes a lot of sense. What corresponds to Chanun? Binyan Av. Binyan Av. By the way, Rabbi Yitzchak of Barditchev has a whole arichos explaining the connection between Binyan Av and Chanun. That the fact that the Rebbe Shem allows us to use the concept of Binyan Av, it shows how much chen we have in the eyes of Hashem. It's a reflection of Hashem's midos of Chanun. So says Bnei Yissaschar, Rachum is to preserve life. Chanun is to have children. But what comes first? First you have the children, and then you got to preserve them. So that's why it's v'chanoisi asher achayin, first to have banim, midas chanun, and then v'richamti es asher rachem, the midah of v'hurachum yichaper. And that's why in that instance it's out of order. And then says the Bnei Yissaschar, let me tell you something I heard from my mechutan, Rav Tzvi Hersh, Mizidachov. The 13th of Yugimel Midah Sha'atayra Nidrashes Bahem is what? V'chein shnei ksuvim amachishim zeh, and likewise two psukim that contradict each other. Ad sheyava yakosav ashlishi, v'yachriya b'neihem. And the question is, what's v'chein? Well, actually, in the more authoritative versions of the Brisa, it doesn't say v'chein; it says v'chan. And Rav Shlomo even says v'chan. Anybody else say v'chan? Svardim. So Sfadim got it right. V'chan shnei ksum achishim zeh. And the Mefarshim say, you're right, it really should say v'chan, but it means v'chein. Yeah, but what does v'chein mean? It doesn't say v'chein by any... What is the... says Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachov. What is the 13th of the Midos Harachamim? According to all accounts, it's v'nakeh. But wait a second. What does v'nakeh means? God cleanses averos. But what are the words after that? Lo yanakeh. So the 13th of the Midas Harachamim is itself Shnei Ksuvim Amachishim Zeh. And the Gemara in Yuma asks, is it V'nakeh or is it Lo yanakeh? And the Gemara says, if you do tshuva, it's V'nakeh, and if you don't do tshuva, it's Lo yanakeh. Says Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachov, well, where's the third pasuk that is machriya between V'nakeh and Lo yanakeh? The third pasuk is in Micha. You know, there are two versions of Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim in the Tanakh. One in Shemais and Kisisa, and one in Micha. One is called the Midas de La'ela, and one is Midas de Tata. What is the 13th of the Midas of Micha? Mimei Kedem. What was created Mimei Kedem? Tshuva. So that third pasuk is Megala, that it's V'nakeh L'Shavim, and it's Lo Yanakeh L'She'enam Shavim. Says Rav Tzvi Hersh Mizidachov, You know why it says V'chan shnei ksuvim achishim zeh? Because this midas harachamim that corresponds to the 13th that Yud Gimel Midas Shatar Nirezhem, it itself is shnei ksuvim amachishim zeh. It itself is shnei ksuvim. That's why it says V'kan in here. V'kan shnei ksuvim amachishim zeh. So what are we learning? We're learning an amazing thing, that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a matana, that if you want to access the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, all you need to do is you learn the Torah Shabbat Peh. Every time you encounter a different midah, you should be aware you are bringing down from Shamayim to the entire world, to all of Klal Yisrael, to your whole family, that corresponding midas harachamim. You learn a Kal V'chomer, it's a very technical limud. There's nothing you could do more to gain the powerful midah of Kel than Hilchos Kal V'chomer. And therefore, Avraham Avinu, whose midas hachesed, where is Avraham Avinu going to learn midas hachesed from? With what methodology? There's only one way to gain chesed. If Shem ben Noach did chesed to the animals on the teva, and then that's because he was saved from the teva, Kal V'chomer, says Avraham Avinu, if I do chesed to Bnei Adam, why does he have to learn it with the Kal V'chomer? Because the entire essence of Kal V'chomer is midas hachesed. What is Kel? Chesed Kel Kol Hayoim. Kihu Kel Zonu Mefarnis LaKol. The midah of Kel is the midah of Chesed. How do you bring it out? By learning Kal V'chomer. That is why, where did Avraham Avinu learn Chesed from? Kal V'chomer. Where did Rabbi Gamliel learn Chesed from? Kal V'chomer from Avraham Avinu. By the way, the Svarim point out, it comes out very interesting, that the Ramah Mipano, we have to quote him every couple of Shiurim. So we have to. Ramah Mipano says, Ram Gamliel was a Gilgal of Shem ben Noach. So it comes out, Abraham made a Kal V'chomer from Shem, and Ram Gamliel, Shem made a Kal V'chomer from Abraham, because you can't do Chesed without Kal V'chomer. It emanates from Kal V'chomer. Okay, that's just no extra charge, okay? So this is the Chiddush of the Malbim. The Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim correspond to Yud Gimel Midos Shatar Nireshesem. This originally came from Rav Baruch Mimezrich, the Maggid Mimezrich. And if you look in number 26, we know there's a klal in Shas. And the klal is Ein Oinshin Min Adin. What's that klal? Klal is, the Gemara says, if we know in the Torah that you get misas bezdin for living with your sister, either from your father or from your mother, we don't necessarily know you get misas bezdin from living with your sister, who's your sister from your father and your mother. Why not? It's a Kal V'chomer. If you chayiv misas bezdin from achoisai me'avicha oy me'imecha, certainly from both, the Gemara says no. Ein oinshin min adin. You can't be ma'anish someone from a Kal V'chomer. So it's brought in the Tshuvos, I just got it. Shalos the Tshuvos, Doivev Meisharim, Rav Doiv Berish Weidenfeld, the Tribuna Rav, Doile Adar in the times of Chazonish. He says, you know why Ein Oinshin Min Adin? Look in the Chidushim of Rabbi Yosef Engel, Beis HaOitzar. Number 29, Rabbi Yosef Engel writes, since Midas Kal V'chomer is Midas HaChesed and Midas HaRachamim, how could you give somebody misas bezdin through a Kal V'chomer? You can't do it. Kal V'chomer, that's where Avraham Avinu learned midas hachesed from. That's how the brothers try to get Rachamei Shamayim when they were dealing with Yosef. That's how Moshe Rabbeinu tried to get Rachamei Shamayim when he's dealing with the Rebbeinu Shalom Zei Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim. Midah Kal V'chomer is corresponding to Kel, No, Rifan Allah. You're going to be ma'anish someone with. So after Rabbi Yosef Engel gives about 8 lamdish reasons for Ein Oinshin Min Adin, he concludes by saying, let me tell you, Divrei Agadata, why Ein Oinshin Min Adin? Because Midas Kal V'chomer is Midas HaRachamim. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel further. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, that is why. Right after Miriam and Aaron spoke Lashon Hara, Hashem comes to them, look at number 27. Says Pirkei de Rebbe Lezer, Hashem descended down to this world. Vayered Hashem ba'amud onon. Vayamoy Pesach Oyel. And he calls to Aaron and Miriam. And he says, Doesn't the Torah say, Or Maki Reyeyu Basaser? And Moshe Rabbeinu is not only Reyeyu, Kavachomer, your brother. Why is Rebbe Hashem making a Kavachomer to Miriam and Aaron? Because Hashem is being Miramis to them. That right now you arouse Midas Hadin. If you want to be Ma'ir Midas Harachamim, you know what you need to do. You got to make a Kavachomer. And then Moshe Rabbeinu will be able to daven Kel Na Rifan Allah. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, one last thing. How do we know that God will fulfill His promise to Klal Yisrael, to Yitzchak Avinu? So if you look at number 28, don't miss this one. If you look at number 28, the Medrash says on the words Ulu Yishmael Shematicha, Kan ben ha'amal lamed mi ben agvira. Says Rebbe Hashem, Hine beirachti oisai, I blessed Yishmael. V'hifreisi oisai, Yishmael. V'herbeisi oisai, Yishmael. Kal v'chaymer es brisi akim es Yitzchak. If I'm going to keep my promise to Yishmael, Kal v'chaymer, I'm going to keep my promise to Yitzchak. Why is Rebbe Hashem making a Kal v'chaymer that He's going to keep His promise to Yitzchak? Just say, I'll keep my promise to Yitzchak. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, because he might have a kasha. The fact that the Rebbe Hashem will keep his promise to Abraham, of course he will. Abraham is Midas HaChesed, Midas HaRachamim. So it's easy to deal, it's easy to keep your side of the deal with Midas HaRachamim. But Yitzchak Avinu is Midas Hadin. With Midas Hadin, with Yitzchak's Midah, the world can't stand. How could Klal Yisrael have existence? So Hashem said, don't worry. Even with Yitzchak, I'm going to temper it with a little Rachamim. How? I kept my promise to Yishmael, and I gave him bracha, and I gave him freisi, ve'erbeisi, ve'erachti, kavachaymer li Yitzchak. So I'm tempering Yitzchak's midas hadin with the midah of kavachaymer. And Rabbi said that's why we're suggesting as a davar pashut that before we begin davening every day, and when we're davening, we're trying to be ma'orer rachamei shamayim. The best way to do so, Rabbi Yishmael oimer. B'shalosh esrei midos haTorah nidrashos lahem. We're ma'orer all the Yud Gimel midos harachamim kal v'chomer gzeira shava. By the way, Rav Yosef Engel has a whole Kabbalistic explanation. Well, if you can't be ma'anesh with a kal v'chomer, because kal v'chomer corresponds to kale, we know you could be ma'anesh with a gzeira shava. The gzeira shava corresponds to rachum. And from here he goes off to explain all the spheros and explains how al pi Kabbalah, even though Gzer Shava is Racham, but it allows for Einshim, okay? And that will be when we're Zoicha to that Madrega. But for now we understand Ein Einshin Minadin, because Kavachoymer is Midas Kale, and therefore when the Rebbe Hashem makes the Kavachoymer, Haloi Sigam Shavas Yamim, Moshe Rabbeinu knows, Kale Na, Rifan Allah. And Rabbi said that means anybody needs Rachamei Shamayim. Baruch Hashem, we have Tefillah, we have Tehillim, but we also have Talmud Bavli, we have Yud Gimel Midosh Shatar Nidreshes Vahem, and that brings down from Shamayim tremendous Shefa of Rachmanos, and all Yud Gimel Midosh HaRachamim. We should all be Zoicha to Rachamei Shamayim.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.